Today's episode is titled Connecting Across the Atlantic. Our guest is Rolf Haugen, a true advocate for Hostfest and a beacon of kindness. He is a legendary figure synonymous with Minot Scandinavian heritage and celebration. With his upcoming 30th trip to Minot, Rolf reflects on his enduring connection to Minot, which began decades ago as the city manager for Skien, Norway, Minot's sister city. Rolf takes listeners on a captivating history lesson about migration and traces the roots of Scandinavian tradition in Minot, as well as the vital role of sister city relations in fostering idea exchanges, cultural education, and connection. Rolf's deep reverence for Hostfest shines as he emphasizes its role in bridging the gap between the past and the present, Scandinavia and America. Enjoy our conversation with Rolf Haugen. Rolf, thanks again for making the time for us here today. And as I said, I really appreciated the insights you offered in the email, and it's fascinating a little bit for us to hear the Norwegian side of Scandinavian people emigrating to the United States. Now, I know that migration began 200 years ago with a little ship called the Restoration.
Yes, the immigration started 200 years ago from the city of Stavanger in Norway. It was a very small ship called the Restoration, as you say, that were 52 immigrants aboard. That was the first organized immigration to the US. 52 people, and children and grown-ups, and 52 feet long boat. And they crossed the Atlantic. And on their way, they had bad weather, and they also had bad navigation. So they ended up in New York 3 months later. It took them 3 months in that small ship to get to New York. And they were 52 when they left, and they were 53 when they came to New York, because a baby was born on that trip. So, and then they came to New York with the ship was called a sloop. And in New York, afterwards, in these days, they have a union called the Sloopers. And they call themselves the descendants from the first immigration people that came to New York.
Do you know how those 52 people were selected or chosen to make that trip?
Yes, it was religiously based. They were Quakers, and they would have the opportunity to practice their own religion, which was very difficult to do in Norway in those days.
So they chose to come. They chose to. A big part of that migration choice for them was not just for opportunity and maybe a new land of promise, but also it would allow them to explore their own religions, which was restricted at the time in Norway.
And many people had that reason for emigrating. But of course, as you say, there were also many other reasons for other people. But the main reason for these people were religion, freedom of religion. To worship the religions they wanted to worship.
When they made it initially, 200 years ago, was the emigration at Ellis Island already set up? Did they have to go through the big process as people did in later years?
Well, I don't know that, but I don't think so. They were there at 1825. I don't think they are set that up. You see, the main emigration came from 1860 to 1930. That was the main period of, I will guess that Ellis Island was operative around that time.
Okay. And when the Great Migration began, talk to us about what that looked like from Norway's perspective. Because on one side, it seems very hopeful. This is a Norway at that time, not a lot of agricultural opportunity, and farms and properties were given to the first son, so the second sons weren't left with much. And what were some of those driving factors that pushed nearly 1 million people to leave Scandinavian countries for the United States?
Well, of course, it was to get the opportunity to get free land and to farm in the US. As you say, that the farms back home, they were quite small. And when the parents got more and more children, they were living longer than the children that they did before. 7, 8, 9 children, they couldn't support them. They didn't have food for them. So the children had to leave their families and go to the United States when they grew up. That was one thing. They wanted to have new land, new opportunities. And of course, it was also to get away from the quite strict regulations in Norway. One is religion, as I said. The other one is priests and government people. They were deciding everything. They didn't have any freedom to work. It was reserved for special classes. They couldn't buy farms because the farmers, they were a special class, and that people that rented from them, they didn't have the opportunity to get their own farms. So they were exploited in a way by the upper class. And then the lower classes, they said this. And then they got the letter from somebody saying, come to America because you're a free man. You can worship your religion. You can get your land. You are on your own. And then, of course, these letters stimulated the interest back home. Although not all of the letters were true, because they wouldn't admit that they had a bad time in the US.
They may have underplayed the harsh winters a little bit, and there was no doubt, a lot of hardship in coming over. See, things sounded like they were really bleak in Scandinavian countries at that time.
It was bleak. It was hard times, little food, scarce food, and low wages. So it was not good to live in Norway at that time if you belonged to the lower classes. The rich people, they managed.
Part of Scandinavian culture, as I understand it, and you point out, it's very rural. It's the poor people. It really is. That's a part of the Scandinavian people who migrated weren't always the shopkeepers and people who were well established. It was country folk. Is that accurate?
Yes, it's accurate that it was mostly country folk that emigrated to get land in the US because they didn't have that opportunity back home.
When people hear Scandinavian culture, how would you define Scandinavian culture?
Well, I think it was quite easy for the Norwegian immigrants to assimilate in the American society. One thing is whiteness. Another thing is religion. The third thing is they were there to work. They wanted to work and create something. They wanted to worship the religion, same religions as many Americans had. So I think that was probably one of the reasons then this happened. Yeah, there could be many other things, but what was your question in particular?
Just how would you define Scandinavian culture?
Let me say something that's really funny off the side. When I came to Hostfest for the first time, I was asked by an old lady. She said, where are you from? And I said, I'm Norwegian. And he said, oh, are you Norwegian? And I said, yes. Then you must be hardworking, honest, and God-fearing. And I said, well, and the immigrants were, but Norway today, that's another matter. But I wouldn't want to disappoint that nice lady, so I wouldn't talk about 80% are members of the state church, 10% go. We have a higher crime rate now. And if we are hardworking, that is also debatable. So you have to compare the modern Norway today. It's not as glamorous as they think it is, but so they think Norway is, so Norwegians they are the best kind, but we are not anymore.
Wow. It's the first time ever. So that's news to me. That's learning. So that was then, as I'm sending, you mentioned in your email that I wanted to come back to as well, when we were talking about those migration stories. At what point do you recall American habits or American ways of life working their way back across the seas? Speaking from personal experience, you mentioned growing up, if you were smoking Camel cigarettes and chewing gum, watching the latest James Dean movie, that you were really living a life that was good. So was this all in post-World War II life?
That is post-World II life, because when I was a boy and I grew up during Second World War II, And after the Second World War, Norway was a very poor country, very poor. We had little money, no food, we were dependent on others. And then the USA was the great benefit. They contributed to help Norwegians. They gave us the Marshall Aid to feed us. We got food from them. They gave us the movies with all the stars. They gave us the American products. I haven't seen chewing gum before I had an American one. And if you had American chewing gum and you had American Camel cigarettes, you're a star. Because and if I should go downtown to meet somebody and I had all those things and perhaps also could afford an American Buick, that would be a great time in Norway. All the girls they would follow me. Have you seen Travolta in Grease? The film Grease? Yeah, that's the same with the cars and the young people and all that. They were very fascinated by the US.
Growing up as a teenager and maybe even into your early 20s, did you guys have the big Saturday night dances like they did here in the rural communities? Most of that Scandinavian culture that maintained was festivities on a Saturday. All the townsfolk, all the small folk would get together, share food, share stories, visit and dance. Was it similar for you in Norway?
Yeah, in a way it was similar for us in Norway, but it is a little bit dependent on where you lived in Norway. If you lived in the city, you could have those dances all week. If you are living on the countryside, you had once a week. You could meet at the house where you had dancing and drinking and whatever. So when I went to school, I had, on my school, we have soirees and dances all week. So we could do that. But it is a very strong impact on Norwegian culture, the American one. And we admire the Americans. The same as that old lady that I told about that said, no, you are Norwegian. If you were American and you came to Norway, you would be a star, a rock star.
Wow. Yeah. Is it still like that today?
A little less like that today. And that has nothing to do with the American people, because they are friendly as ever. It has to do with American politics.
At least we're friendly here in the Midwest anyway. I can't speak for the coastal America, but we got Midwest nice working in our favor. Maybe that comes a little bit from the Scandinavian countries. So when you say that you've kind of studied the migration of 800,000 plus people from Scandinavian territories over the years, what's the main thing you've learned? What's your biggest takeaway from your time researching the migration?
Well, the biggest thing for me in that connection is that all those people that found their way to America and stayed there had a great impact on the American society with the democratic ideas, their politics, their hardworking. They got into offices, into politics. So the Norwegian Scandinavian culture made a great impact on the American society. And many of their ideas and how they behaved and that, many Americans took like that. And I have somebody that's had an uncle in America, and he was a newspaper editor, and somebody will be actors, and we had judges, and I even heard that your High Court Justice Earl Warren, he was of Norwegian descent, and James Arness in Gunsmoke was Norwegian, Arlen Dahl was Norwegian actress and all that. So we made and we have inventors, as Hilton Hotels is a Norwegian, came from Toten in Norway. Eivind Ruud Motors, that is Eivind Ruud from Toten, Norway. So we have many of those Norwegians that made an impression, and the career, soccer trainers, football trainers. So I think they assimilated and contributed much to the American society.
And you mentioned the importance of families, people who are migrating from Norway and Scandinavian countries. Most of them didn't forget about home. Much of the financial gains were being sent back home.
Yeah, that is correct. There is the immigrants that made their success and earned money in America, they sent money back to their families. Quite huge sums of monies. And they also came visiting. Eventually, they did that. When they had enough money to go back to their homeland, they came. And then if you had somebody coming from the US and had made a success coming back to your family, they will welcome him with open arms and say, and perhaps he had some extra money too, so they can,
Well, I think there's power in that difficulty of having to leave your homeland and push toward an uncertain future. And when I reflect on the idea that if I would have been a second son, there would have been nothing for me. And I had the idea that somebody could get perhaps bitter feelings over that and still have will and still be able to honor the tradition of their life and to honor their family. I don't know. It's just a powerful thing to me. I found it difficult to accept that if you're a second son out there, you're just kind of screwed. Well, just sorry for your luck. You were born second. We got nothing for you. Good luck in America.
Well, that's what's the way the rural system was in Norway, that there was the oldest son that had a farm. And if he had a farm, many of them didn't own a farm, but if you had a farm, the oldest son took over. And then the other one, to get a living, they would go to America and farm there. And then, in a way, they had a little bit of bad conscience, really, because when you leave your family, and you have a saying here that only the best go west, and that is the best part of the population, the young ones, the eager ones, not the women, but the young men, they went to America. And then, of course, and they invited the woman to come after. But mostly they were old people, women that were left behind. So the young people went over, and then, of course, they had to send money back to support their families when they came to the riches to support them. So that was a very big thing for many immigrants, to support their family, which they left behind.
And that really generated, I think, a strong sense of pride for them to be able to take care of their families from afar.
Yes, I think they felt that as almost an obligation.
Yeah, I think that mixture of hope and sadness, I guess the hope of I'm finding something greater, along with the sadness of I'm leaving behind my family, everything I know. There was no certainty when you left Norway that you were ever going to see your family again when you got on that boat to come to America.
That's true. There is no certainty of coming back. And there is one thing then, when you left, and if you had a woman, a wife, and you brought her with you, I have been wondering about, it is undervalued, I think, the efforts from the women that emigrated with their husbands, because they did most of the work in the house, and the farms, in the fields. They had babies, no doctors for 100 miles away. They had to give birth to children. So recently there's been made a film in Norway about focusing on the women in the immigration system, who are really undervalued. So because they should be more lifted up, I think, because it was the women that bore many of the burdens.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I appreciate you pointing that out. Their role in all this is critical. And even again, in thinking of sending away at that time, they were sending ambitious people who were hungry for more in life and couldn't get it there. Did that create a period of stagnation in Scandinavian countries?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, it's created a period of stagnation, yes, because the people that were left behind, they were, as I said, old people and children, perhaps. So they were very dependent on the people that left them. So it stagnated, and many had hard times, and that's why it was so important that they could give something back. So, but many of the people, of course, that emigrated to the US, they didn't make it. So they couldn't give anything back because they failed. They didn't have success. Wouldn't admit it, of course. And then many of them came home permanently. So we had about, I don't know the percentage. I think it's about 30% of the immigrants came back to Norway because they didn't make it in the US.
Yeah, that is a substantial portion. Do you know, assigned? Was it mostly the homesteading and the opportunity to be given land if you could work it? That's what really drove the Scandinavian people into the West?
Yes, that's what drove them was the Homestead Act, where they got free land. 160 acres of land was given them by the government. And because the American government wanted them to come, because they wanted them to cultivate all that land. So that was the main factor. But of course, the other factor was that you have those letters from the other people that came over and said, you should come because this is the promised land and everything is so good. And they will, so it's a combination a little bit, because the only way they could know about this was by letters. Sure. And thousands of letters were sent across the Atlantic describing how life was. And the American government advertised in Norway, come to the US because here's a new life for you, because they wanted people to come.
Yeah, there was a lot of advertising, not just in the United States, but that was sent across the globe, making a lot of big promises, sometimes not highlighting all the dangers. Yeah, you didn't always hear about the scary winters, especially in the initial ongoing as we're approaching 200 years of this, the early goings in the 1800s. Very tough, very scary, lots of ways to lose your life and never be heard from again. And some of that was, I think it was really brushed over. You had the railroads advertising to people. The American government is advertising to people. They're promising money. They're promising land. And that brought a lot of people here. And I guess a big congregation of Scandinavians landed right here in the Midwest, as you said, thanks to the Homestead Act. And here in North Dakota, we have people that have loved their Scandinavian heritage so much, who they did not want it forgotten. And they built the Hostfest right here in Minot. And we love it. And we're proud of it. From the outside looking in, it doesn't feel like a place that a lot of people would want to come to. And here we built a city that's maintained for years. And people like you come from all over the world to our little town. Minot became this crossroads of Scandinavian tradition and culture with a rural way of life here in the United States. And it's just really fascinating to me how all of that came together and why, like our need to not forget where we came from became so important that it developed into this very significant festival, again, that draws people from all over the world.
It's a matter of heritage, because when Chester Wrighton founded Hostfest, he was the president of Hostfest. His idea was exactly as you say. He said, when the Norwegians came over and they started farming, built their farms, churches and schools and all that, they had so much hard work that they could only meet Sunday's church and have a talk. All week they had to work, but in Sunday they had time off. Then they could come together with family and have talks and of his life, have you heard from back home, and they had those. And that's Chester Wrighton said to himself, let's make that happen in Minot. Let's get the Scandinavians together to talk about their experiences with the forefathers, so you can meet and sort of camaraderie and talk with your fellow about things, how are things, where you come from. So they transplanted that into the Hostfest. It should be a meeting place for Scandinavians that had come over, and a chance to meet others, have their traditions back, have their food, the lefse and the lutefisk and clothing and everything. That was so important for the Norwegians at that time. And that has been a part of the culture of the US now, not only at the Hostfest. I believe that. I was in New York some years ago. I was in Brooklyn. It was a big area for Norwegian immigrants because they merged together, as I said, that's in families. And in Brooklyn, we have two Norwegian dishes, food. And two of the streets were named after Norwegian dishes. One was called Fårikål Avenue, and fårikål is a Norwegian dish, and the other one was lapskaus, which is also a Norwegian dish. So the streets were named after food in Brooklyn. You could imagine. Now the Chinese have taken over Brooklyn, so there's no more traces of that culture anymore. But Brooklyn was a very, very many Norwegians lived, because many came to the cities. Not all came to the farms. So New York was great. And then you had, I was looking at it, who were the most welcome in New York, for instance, of immigrants? So the list. And on top was the white people, but not all the white people. Norwegians and Scandinavians, they were on top because they had the same religion. They were hardworking and they were honest and God-fearing or whatever. Number two was the Irish, because they didn't rank number one, because the Irish, they had a bad language and they didn't smell good. And number three was Italians and the Spanish people, the mafia people and all that created problems. And the last group was the colored people. And we have the same distinctions in Norway today, I think. If you wanted to come to Norway as a white American, you would be welcomed.
All right, Rolf, I'm curious. When did you first hear about the Hostfest?
It was in 1993. I was city manager in Skien. And then I had an approach from a lady called Rolf Haugen, who is inducted into the Hall of Fame. She came to me and said, Rolf, Minot is, we have been visiting Minot from Norway from 1981 with small groups of people. But you should, as a city manager, make it official. So the city of Skien should say that we want to have Minot as a sister city. So I took that up to the city council and they voted on it. And they said, okay, we'll be sister cities. And then the first year in 1994, I went over as a city manager and had politicians and other people from Skien with me to see what its Hostfest was all about then.
Why was it important for you to go into that job? What does it mean? Sister city. Can you explain that a little bit?
A sister city, that is something that almost the basis idea for it was General Eisenhower. After the Second World War, he said, no more wars. We should have people connecting. So if you can connect with cities and people in a friendly basis, that will prevent war and things. If people can meet each other face to face. So sister city is that we meet, we talk, we exchange ideas, we visit each other, we learn about each other's cultures. So it is a sort of, it's not financial. We can learn how is your education, what do you do about this and that. So it is mainly a basic thing to meet, exchange ideas, and learn from each other. And we have a sister city agreement with Minot, and it's based on those factors: education, tourism, of course, that can be important, because every city can have visitors coming from both sides. That's important. And of course, it is the educational system with universities. We have student exchange and that kind of thing. Abby is one of those. She was the first one that came from Minot to Telemark on the exchange program. And she has become the most famous ambassador for Skien that we had for many years.
Yes, Abby's fantastic. And that feels like a really significant in your life and career, a hallmark, if you will, to have helped foster in this sister city concept, which is really a cultural exchange, and it's the exchange of ideas and different ways to solve problems. I love the idea that it was meant to be an intellectual exchange. As you said, not financial, although certainly there could possibly lead to financial benefits, but this was not based on financial promises. This was a promise of, let's learn about each other.
And the idea of friendship, be friendly. And so that's the main idea. We have the same Norway has, or Skien has also connection with the Scandinavian countries. We have the same there. We have sister cities in Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, Finland. So we meet. And I also have the pleasure, we have the sister city in Italy. It's called Sorrento. It's down by Capri, way down south in Italy. The reason for that was our great playwright Henrik Ibsen. He was born in Skien and he created his works in Italy. So that was a cultural exchange. We have a sister city in Romania. We have one in Russia.
So you guys are quite the group of ambassadors there, a lot of diplomats.
Well, some are more active than others. But so the Scandinavian countries and the Italian one and the American one, those are the most active.
Rolf, when we became sister cities, had you heard of the Hostfest? And when you made it to Minot, what was your impression?
Well, I didn't know what to expect, really. So everything, when I came, probably we got a special VIP treatment because it stuck in my mind. We were picked up at the airport by a white limo. And it was Gail Peterson that drove it. She ran the restaurant called The Field and Stream on the Field at that time, up nearby the base, I think. And we had our sister city dinners up there for many years. But we were greeted so politely and so respectfully. And I didn't know what it was. And when I came to Hostfest and saw all those people and all those booths and what the hectic life, I was quite stunned by it. And Skien had their own booth. And it said Skien community, and I was standing there and we greeted all those American people that came to our booth and said my grandmother came from this place and that place. And so it was a sort of vibrant community where people of all beliefs and salesmen and voluntary organization all merged together. It was very, very impressive. I had never seen something like that before.
Community is a word we're hearing associated a lot with the Hostfest and with Scandinavian people. What does community mean to you?
Community means to me that in this area, in the Midwest, it is the Norwegian Scandinavian traditions that I'm aware of, because I wouldn't be greeted if I had a sister city in Saudi Arabia or any other place, because I come home in a way, because they're saying we are Norwegians, and they come, and I'm 50% Norwegian, I'm 90% Norwegian. So I have a very strong feeling of I meet them, and they are proud of their heritage. They're proud of their Norwegian language. They're proud of the traditions and the food and the lutefisk and the lefse and those things we have back home. And they strengthen our awareness of that, really. Because I have lutefisk for Christmas, but this shouldn't be on film, but when I tasted lutefisk in Minot at Hostfest the first time, they had spoiled it because they had lutefisk and meatballs at the same plate. You can do that. You spoil lutefisk, of course. You have to have lutefisk, bacon, sausage, peas, and everything else good. And you have to have the aquavit and a beer. And then it's perfect. But they had water and meatballs and lutefisk. You can't eat that. It's impossible. And now I've noticed they are going to have a lutefisk competition here. And it is how much you can eat. You're going to spoil the interest for lutefisk totally. I'm quite sure. It's going to destroy. I haven't heard that. That's awful.
Pulling away from the lutefisk, there really is a lot of fantastic Norwegian cuisine. What are your favorites?
My favorite is what we call the same. That's a street in New York, fårikål. That's a chopped lamb with what do you call cabbage, and boiled and with sauce and that. That's almost that's my favorite, and that is one year it was Norway's #1 course in the competition. fårikål, or I can also have things like kjøttkaker. It would be a sort of meatballs, and the way they make it back home. And of course, I'm not fond of fish, but many Norwegians like salmon and fish because we have a rich fishery. So fish is important to many Norwegians.
Cuisine has become a pretty big part of the culture here, a pretty big part of the history, even then. And lutefisk becomes the butt end of a lot of jokes because of what it is. But I think it's important to really highlight there's a lot of fantastic, delicious food that is here and this whole tradition of restaurants.
Oh, yeah. But it's quite fun because when I have Americans visiting Norway, for instance, in the summertime, they ask, where can we have lutefisk? And I say, we don't eat lutefisk in the summer. We eat it in the Christmas time. Oh, so they think we are eating lutefisk all year round. But the Norwegian cuisine is much more than that, as we say. We have many good chefs. Norway has won 3 or 4 times the world championship in cooking with Norwegian chefs. We have excellent cooks in Norway. We have Michelin 1, 2, and 3 stars restaurants all over, spread over Norway. So the Norwegian food tradition is very good now.
Really good, really good. And I hope that as we consider the future of the Hostfest, I would love to see an even bigger emphasis on the exquisite cuisine. And I think, again, with the lutefisk and the meatballs, we might be overlooking some of the other good stuff, especially when we've got Michelin star restaurants in Norway. Norwegian chefs heading them up. Let's get them involved. That'd be fantastic.
You see, we had Norwegian chefs involved in a larger degree in Minot before, because have you been to the Hostfest many times? They had a restaurant called 1, 2, 3, and then they had over Norwegian courses and chefs, and it was closed down for some reason. I don't know, it doesn't exist anymore. So that was try to achieve what you said, to present modern Norwegian food.
Something else that stuck out to me when I was researching the Scandinavian way of life and Nordic culture was there's a lot of folk tales and fairy tales. What do you know about Norwegian folk tales? Do you have a favorite?
It is not only Hans Christian Andersen's Dane, he wrote fairy tales, but we had 3 very famous Norwegian writers that wrote fairy tales about trolls and those kinds of things. And they were very important to us because I read that to my children. They were scared to death, but they had to listen to it because they are very, very ugly and they are not nice at all. But the trolls are very important. And we keep that tradition in Norway, but with the trolls. We don't believe that there are trolls, but the myth is still... and it comes from... If you imagine yourself going 200 years back then, as we talked about, in Norway, with 1 million people spread all over the country, no electrical lightning, dark woods, mountains, creates everything, images in your head, of course, in the dark, and you could see trolls and you can see anything around. So it became a sort of folk talking. People were talking about supernatural things, and this if you had I don't know what you call them, leprous corns, that if you had food set out to those people, if you didn't, you would die in 3 months or so.
That was a superstition, if you will. People would leave food out for these mythical trolls, elves.
Trolls, they were scary because the trolls lived inside the mountains, and they came out in night. And if they went out into the sunshine, they would boom. So they had to only go in the night. And they had, if you were taken by a troll and into the mountain, you were captured it. And the troll took young ladies and put them into the mountains, and they never came out. And so those myths spread around in the old days. So trolls are not dangerous, but I haven't really understood why the Americans are so occupied with trolls. Because they had trolls over figures of trolls and other. So I could be perhaps that their forefathers had told them about these trolls and the mystery and the old times back in Norway and how things were then. And So I can then, and we, as I said, I still continue to read about them for my children because they're very scary, but it's interesting.
These stories, these fairy tales, my understanding are a big part of Scandinavian culture and that dates way back.
Yeah, and yes, and today too, but not as much as when we live it, because when we have cruise ships coming into Oslo, for instance, the boots will have trolls on exhibitions, so they can buy trolls because American soldiers would like to buy a troll, and they earn money from it. But it's not; they don't sell it because they believe in it. It's just a way of getting something sold.
But there's a real history there with these trolls, and these trolls are like a boogeyman for the kids. They make you want to listen to your mom and dad, or the trolls might come. And trolls are kind of everywhere here at the Hostfest now.
Seen that, and they're perhaps focusing too much on the Vikings and the trolls and the old things. Too, of course, there should be, but that what Jessica and others are striving at now is to find the balance between the new and the old. At that moment, it's perhaps a little bit much too old to get the young people to be interested.
I don't know. I feel like young people are very creatively imaginative. I might be on the opposite end of that in believing that young people would be more interested to learn about the trolls and the myths and the legends and the fairy tales because we're writing books about these things. We're watching movies about this stuff. So I think that for whatever my 2 cents is worth, I think there's a strong home for these myths and legends here. And I feel like there might be interest in the younger generations for that.
I agree to a certain point. Of course, young people think that could be interesting with the trolls and all that. But I've been doing speeches around on the schools in Minot about the modern Norway. I've tried to educate your young people what is Norway today. It's not only trolls and Vikings. What are Norway? And they don't know anything about it. You don't have any Scandinavian culture classes in your schools. So what they know about Norway will be trolls and whatever. So I say Norway is not like that today. If you could come to Norway as a young man, young girl, you will find that Norwegians, we don't have polar bears in the streets anymore. We have even television series that's Friends and Beaches and whatever they call those. And we have school systems. We have young people with this and that, similar to what you are learning in your school. And so you can come over and have an impression of Norway. We wouldn't take them into the woods and scare them. We'd take them to a school, a modern school in Norway. So kids want to have fun. They want to have something to do. So I'm wondering, as I said some years ago, it's not a very bright idea, but I said, how should we get Scandinavian youth to come to Hostfest and the American and the Canadian? Let's make a competition between young people, as they do at, you have American Idol or England. Let's make a song competition. We can come and compete, singing and create a winner or whatever. So we have the purpose of coming over as a young man or girl. But that's they wouldn't heard because probably too costly. But you have to do something to get the young people interested. And that I don't think that troll is the main factor for that. But on the other side, it is important to learn them about our heritage and how live were in the old days, because they can learn much from how life was. And troll could be a part, of course, the old times myths, so they should be aware of, but it's not much more.
I think people find a connection to stories. You know, people find connection to experiences, and the Hostfest is an experience. There's a reason people keep coming back. Something that we really want to try to pass on to anyone who might listen to this is, why is the Hostfest important? Why does this matter?
The Hostfest is important as any other historical event. You have to be aware of your past to learn into the future. So we can bring the best of the traditions into your new modern life. So it connects the old and the new things, and the old things are many, many things to be aware of that can enrich you as a person in your modern life, of course. That's very important. But you mustn't focus. You must focus on the values of the old things that really meant something. I think, and of course, it can be. It is very difficult because I should like to have more people, young people from mine come to Norway, have more exchange and have them. We have Minot State University choir there twice, and we have other delegations, but we should really have more student exchange, summer courses, or whatever it is.
And having Minot as a sister city, we should hopefully be able to foster that a little bit more. And I think coming back to that sense of community and kinship that is generated at the Hostfest can kind of serve as a connective tissue to help that.
I agree. Hostfest can do that. Because one thing is a sister city relation between politicians and city managers and all that. But Hostfest has its own life and its own very important to connect. So I think it is very important, really, to keep it going. It is. So we have already planned in Skien a visit to Hostfest next year. They are setting up a delegation again. We had a local community government election in Norway now. That's why I'm all by myself this year. Because I'm not a politician, I don't need to be elected. So I went over. But next year, the new mayor of Skien will come, the new county mayor will come, and they will try to talk about the things that the sister city relationship sort of is going to be. Because the original idea, when Chester Wrighton would have Skien as a sister city, that was because we had at that time a fall festival too. So that we had similar sizes of the cities. We had both had festivals, and that was natural to merge.
Rolf, do you have a particular memorable story or experience that really stands out to you at the Hostfest more than the others?
Well, I have a story, small story, but two stories. The first one was when I met a girl, 16, 17 years. She was a volunteer on the parking lot here in Minot. It was at that time, Hostfest was in October. It was very cold. It was freezing, and she stood out there with a jacket and all that, and she. That's you Americans do, or they do. Young people, they talk, so say hi, and how. She was very friendly, and she said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm Norwegian." And that 16 years old girl said, "My great grandmother was Norwegian, and she has taught me a song, and I don't know what the words mean, but I've learned to sing it." And out of that parking lot, said, "Oh, let's sing it then," I said. And she started to sing that song for me. And it was because it was a song that I was familiar with it. It was a song about really thank song to God and food and everything that was valuable to them. But seeing that 16 years old girl singing that song in Norwegian for me, at that parking lot, that made my day. And I had almost another example, and there was also in Norwegian yesterday, I was in the Denby at the Sondre Norheim. Then we had this choir from Minot called the Change of Pace Singers. They sang in Norwegian. And that song, which they sang, is a very popular song in Norway, thinking about how your homeland stimulates you, how you long for your homeland, and how nice it is to be a Norwegian and all that. And I was thinking of that Sondre Norheim guy that emigrated from Morgedal when he was downhill skier, and came to Minot or Denby, totally flat. His skis stood leaned upon the wall. He couldn't use them anymore, and he had sick. He was longing for his homeland all the time, and then that choir then they sang "Norway, my Norway, I'm longing for you" in Norwegian. I thought that could have been Sondre Norheim staring out into the prairie and longing to go back home. So those things make an impression on me, not big things, but the small things, meeting people.
Small things matter. They connect us. Change starts small. I think that big things happen from the bottom up, not the top down.
I totally agree, because it is, and it also helps then that I have discovered during the years that people in Minot, have the same kind of humor as we have. They are down-to-earth people and they are friendly, and so that helps. So I used to joke with them and said, "You're almost like Norwegians," and they say, "Well, we are connected."
So here's maybe a tough question, Rolf, and we're just about done here. If you could give a message or say something to anyone who has never experienced the Hostfest or who thinks the Hostfest is not for them, what would you say?
You mean I will be in Norway or in Minot?
Both.
Well, in both countries, I will say that you should go to the Norsk Hostfest. That will give you a lifetime adventure and experience, because they focus on so much good traditional values that you have to be aware of. So we should go there just to learn a little bit about your heritage and how life was before. So I will advertise. I'm going to be an advertiser for Hostfest the rest of my life, because I think it's the most important thing I've been to.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. For more information on the Norsk Hostfest, please visit www.hostfest.com. This podcast was made possible by the Minot Area Community Foundation's Williamson Fund and the generous support of private donors. Thank you for listening.